Hey guys, how's it going? So I'm here for some Friday reads, and the sort of big event in my reading life this week is that I have finally finished reading the complete works of Shakespeare. I read All's Well That Ends Well, Cymbeline, and the Sonnets and narrative poems. And yeah, I don't have too many comments on them, beyond that I really enjoyed Cymbeline. It was a great play to end on, I think. It's a very engaging read, and there's an excerpt from a book in the back of this edition of mine, where the author argues that it's kind of a masterpiece of dramatic irony, where there are so many characters who are in the dark about several different things, most of them. There are several characters who are in disguise in this play. There are several characters who are deceived deliberately in some way or another, and all in ways that we can see just how this play could have ended so poorly. This could, with a few key points changed, this play could have easily been a tragedy rather than a comedy or a tragicomedy. So that made it a very engaging read, and it was also very engaging because it's one of the few Shakespeare plays where I went into reading it without knowing really anything about the plot, which I really liked. So yeah, I really liked Cymbeline. I also enjoyed All's Well That Ends Well. I liked Helen as a protagonist in All's Well That Ends Well. She's this female character who really knows what she wants and does everything she can to get it. And she also has a lot of great poetry in her lines in the play, which I love. And what's interesting about All's Well That Ends Well too is it's one of the few of Shakespeare's plays where there is a sort of mentor-student relationship between an older woman and a younger woman, which is very interesting because I think Marjorie Garber in her chapter on All's Well That Ends Well points out that most of the mentor-student relationships are either between a man and a woman or between a man and another man. So that was really interesting, and I really enjoyed it again. And then the poems, I have even fewer insightful comments to say about those. The sonnets I enjoyed; they were easy to read. Although Helen Vendler's introduction makes clear that if you scratch the surface and dig deeper with the sonnets, there is a lot of complexity there. But I was reading them for a surface level enjoyment, and I did mark some that I want to return to. But I have said that I'm not the hugest fan of love poetry. But then there's another poem in here that I really enjoyed, one of Shakespeare's narrative poems, The Rape of Lucrece, which is about a woman in ancient Rome named Lucretia who is raped, and following her rape, she gazes at a painting of the fall of Troy and just contemplates the suffering in that painting, depicted in that painting, and her own suffering, and kind of compares them a little bit. And then she sends a message to her husband to come to her, and her husband comes, and she tells him what happened to her, that she was raped, and then she commits suicide right in front of him. And then he and some other Romans decide to get revenge on her rape, on the man who raped her. And basically, this poem is just about her feelings and reaction leading up to the rape and after the rape, and her feelings while gazing at this painting, and leading up to her suicide, and the man who rapes her as well, his thoughts and feelings leading up to his decision to rape her, and it's all just conveyed so vividly. All the images and emotions were just so vividly painted, and it was great. So yeah, anyway, complete works of Shakespeare. I've read them all at least once. And I look forward to rereading them in the future. I do tend to enjoy Shakespeare plays more on a second reading. So, yeah, and I imagine I will sprinkle those throughout my reading life, hopefully. There are some Shakespeare plays that I know I need to reread more than others. Like when I read the 2 parts of Henry IV, I didn't pay attention while reading them enough, or something just didn't click while I was reading the 2 parts of Henry IV. Falstaff is so beloved that it would be hard for me to come along and say that he's overrated. I would say that it was my problem when I read those plays, that they were kind of an anticlimax for me. So those I desperately need to reread. Some of his comedies, like Twelfth Night, I kind of rushed through. But anyway, yeah, so I will be rereading Shakespeare throughout my life, so yeah. But moving on, I also started to read selected essays of Montaigne, and so far, as I expected and as I've heard, Montaigne has a lot of very modern views. Maybe one not really disappointment, but one observation so far is that I haven't really been challenged by the essays so far. I read about 6 of them, and I haven't really found anything in them to challenge me much. I basically agree with Montaigne on most things, I guess. But he conveys his views with a lot of charm, or at least a lot of charm that comes through in this translation. This is an older translation, I think, from the 16 or 1700s. And so I enjoy reading them anyway. And yeah, anyway, I've only read 6 so far. I think I've read about 50 pages of this, and I'll just chip away at this throughout the rest of the summer. So there's that. Then I yesterday finally picked up the Iliad. This is the Robert Fitzgerald translation. I'm reading this along with Steve Donahue's read-along of the Iliad, and so I'm not going to talk too much about it here. I'm about 80 pages in. I've read up to book 3, through book 3, I believe. Anyway, I'm going to be hopefully making videos about the Iliad as we go along in the read-along. So again, I'm not going to talk about it too much, but the Robert Fitzgerald translation is beautiful, though, so I highly recommend it. Next, just yesterday, a bit on a whim, I picked up Wallace Stevens again. This is his collected poetry and prose. And so I'm reading my 2nd volume of his poetry. The nice thing about this collection is that each of the individual volumes that Wallace Stevens published is sort of in here as its own unit. So I read Harmonium earlier this year, and now I'm reading Ideas of Order, which was published back in 1936. And yeah, I have been saying for a long time that Sunday Morning is my favorite Wallace Stevens poem, but now that I'm about halfway through Ideas of Order, I have to say it's going to be hard for me ever to pick a favorite Wallace Stevens poem, because I came in here and there were several poems just in the first 10 pages that I liked at least as much as Sunday Morning, if not more. So, but yeah, Wallace Stevens is just great. I've been listening to a lecture on Wallace Stevens' long poem, The Auroras of Autumn. I'll try to remember to leave a link to the lecture, but it's by Marie Boroff, who is a professor at Harvard. Or no, at Yale. It's just very insightful. The Auroras of Autumn is a difficult poem, so her lecture is helping me. I'm going to reread that. I'm hopefully going to reread that this summer. I reread it last year. I've read it twice so far. But yeah, I love Wallace Stevens. And then finally, I just received this in the mail the other day from Steve Donahue. So this is Why We Need Religion by Stephen T. Asma. I think Why We Need Religion is kind of a deceptive title, because it makes it sound like this book is going to be trying to convince the reader that they should be religious, and why we should all be religious. That's absolutely not what it's about. But let me read you the dust jacket. How we feel is as vital to our survival as how we think. Based on the premise that emotions are largely adaptive, this claim serves as the organizing theme of Why We Need Religion. Stephen T. Asma argues that religion, like art, has direct access to our emotional lives in ways that science does not. Science can cause curiosity and wonder, but much emotional suffering and vulnerability is beyond the reach of scientific help. Unlike secular authors who praise religion's ethical and civilizing function, Asma argues that its core value lies in its emotionally therapeutic power. So that's the first part of the dust jacket. And yeah, so this was right up my alley. Steve sent it to me because he thought it would be a good book for me to write a review of, for Open Letters Review. Therefore, I'm not going to talk too much about it, because I'm going to be writing about it, but I will say that so far, I haven't found any big problems with it. I've gone through the introduction in the first, big section, and it's good so far. So far, I'm mostly on board. So, yeah, and speaking of writing reviews, my first review for Open Letters Review was just posted online. It's of Supernatural by Clay Rutledge, so I'll leave a link to that review. Well, I'll let you read the review and find out what it's about. Yeah, anyway, so that is my Friday reading. I'm gonna go ahead and continue to read this, and probably work on reading the Iliad some more, and read some Wallace Stevens today. So yeah, anyway, have a great day, guys. Bye!